He's looking at making an acquisition. There's another landscaping business down the road, but he's worried about blowing up his own business.
Just to make sure that, is this a good fit for you and is this the best use of your funds? As opposed to, should I build or should I buy?
When does buying out a competitor actually beat growing organically?
There is no simple answer, to be very honest and truthful about it. It depends on multiple factors.
Welcome to Ask Frank. We're in 15 minutes. We have an expert answer one of our audience members' questions. And today we're really lucky to be joined by Matt Manavi, one of the most credentialed Main Street business brokers in the US. He's the CEO and the co-founder of Transworld Business Advisors, a Southern California operation. So yeah, Matt, welcome to Ask Frank.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So today we've got a question from a gentleman called Aaron. He's written in, he runs a landscaping company in California. He's just crossed over 1.5 million. He's got the trucks, he's young, he's got the crew, and he's looking at making an acquisition. There's another landscaping business down the road, but he's worried about blowing up his own business. So I guess his question is, should I buy the shop down the street? And I thought just to answer it, it'd be great just maybe if we take a step back, just to understand a little bit of your role here, right? What do you do? What does Transworld do? And then how do you guys actually get involved with a business like Aaron's?
So we mainly represent the sellers. However, we have also represented buyers. And many of the buyers are first-time buyers, or maybe they have a small operations, unlike this gentleman who wants to expand. And then our expertise will become very handy and helpful to the individual buyer, just to make sure that, is this a good fit for you and is this the best use of your funds? As opposed to, should I build or should I buy?
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue, right? So, I guess you see both sides of the transaction. In your view, when does buying out a competitor actually beat growing organically?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And there is no simple answer, to be very honest and truthful about it. It depends on multiple factors. And the factors are, in terms of like landscaping, well, is it commercial or is it residential? What is the current, like the buyer? What is the strategic growth decision that the buyer has? Because it all depends on that. For example, let's say the buyer has residential landscaping services, right? And then this business is in commercial. Well, do you want to expand into commercial or you want to stay with residential? If it's not, I want to stay in residential, then it's not a good fit. So it all depends on multiple factors, that when we represent buyers, we do a pre-qualification and we ask all these questions from them. Why are you trying to buy a business? Help me understand. What's the objective and what are we trying to accomplish? Then from it, we can guide them in terms of the type of businesses that it makes sense to look for.
Okay. And I think that's and when you're kind of looking at these businesses from either a buy perspective or a sell perspective, like what's the back of the envelope kind of kitchen table math that you're doing, right? Because I know that you see a lot of Main Street businesses. These businesses are doing, sub 5, sub 10, sub 15. What are these trade businesses? What are they selling for on a multiple basis? And I guess how does that compare to, what the seller actually wants to get?
Yes. So what we always explain is, listen, the seller is most probably selling his or her baby, because they have been at it for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Most probably they started from nothing, or they bought a business 20, 30 years ago and they grew it to where it is today. So it is a baby, and it is a very emotional transaction. We recognize that, and we usually convey that to the buyer. On the other hand, the buyers are 100% financially driven. Does it make sense to me? Therefore, there is that mismatch, that clash of expectations. And that's where we come in, trying to make sure that we can be that bridge, helping the buyer and seller communicate. Many a time, so almost all the time actually, we provide a comprehensive business valuation to the seller if you represent a seller. Or if you represent a buyer, we perform a business valuation for the buyer to say, look, here's what we think the business is worth. Whether it's on the price, it is right on the price, or it's overpriced. Here's what the offer should be. In a similar way, if you represent a seller, then Most often we hear that I heard it from fill in the blank, so and so. Sell my business for 2 or 3 times the revenue. No, you cannot. That's not true. It's usually as a multiple of seller discretion earning or adjusted EBITDA. There's only maybe a handful of businesses that would be sold as a multiple of revenue. And most businesses don't fall in that category.
And I think, we're kind of now talking about the selling element and, this gentleman here, he's young, he's got the crew. What's the approach to get, I think we're seeing this wave of, baby
Yeah,
boomers are starting to retire. We're starting to see some of these younger people coming in. What's the approach to get, that baby boomer to even just take the meeting? And, I think what's how are we getting in front of these people?
great question. So there are two approaches. One approach is that, let's say we present a buyer, let's say this individual, and the individual says, again, I'm making assumptions. The individual says that I am only looking for landscaping companies that serve the residential industry market space. Then the low hanging fruit is do the search on the web of what is available businesses for sale right now. These sellers are already there. They already want to sell their business. So then we reach out to the selling business broker on behalf of the buyer and then start inquiring questions. Hey, here's an NDA. Can you send me a copy of this SIN? And things and so on. So we can understand the business intricacies and then be able to explain that to the buyer. That's the low hanging fruit. That's kind of the quickest path to acquiring a business. The other approach is, let's say then there's none available that and the buyer says, but I really want to buy a business within the next, say, 4 to 6 months, for example. Then the next wave of approach is and what we usually do is we formulate an email. We subscribe to databases where we can find a name of the business owners and then reach out directly to business owners in a very polite, a very respectful way of, we have a qualified buyer who's interested in possibly purchasing your business. Have you considered exiting your business anytime soon?
When you're seeing these buyers in the market, even the sellers, right? Like, what does the financing menu look like? Like, what are you seeing a lot of at the moment? We've got SBA through to seller finance.
Right.
I guess when you're looking at these, what's like the cleanest style of transaction? What's the best for kind of both parties? Do you like to only work with people that have got pre-approval leading into this? I'd just love to understand that landscape.
When we represent a buyer, we definitely, as part of our pre-qualification, not only we determine the industry, the market, and the business size spaces that we can go after, but also we pre-qualify the buyer with SBA lender. At the end of the day, many businesses may be good and the due diligence may complete, but the deal will not close until the funding is there. So this is one of the most important aspects. So the short answer is yes. We do want to work with pre-qualified buyers, and we pre-qualified buyers whom we represent. A most typical approach to selling a business when we represent sellers, we usually want 90 to 100% of the selling price to come between the buyer and the SBA lender. We always encourage the seller to carry a seller note. The SBA lenders love it. The buyers even love it more because it just shows trust that as a business owner, I trust my business so much that I'm willing to have skin in the game and carry a seller note. This means a lot. And historically, I remember there was a publication, maybe by IBBA, International Business Broker Association, that said, typically the businesses for which the business owner carries a seller note sells 10% higher than the businesses that they don't. And that all relates to the trust that a buyer will have into the business that, oh yeah, this is a great business because the owner trusts and not just throwing the ball and walking away.
So maybe it'd be great both for Aaron, for the audience, like, what is a seller note? How does a seller note work? How long is someone locked in for? Like, I'd love just to understand that in a little bit more detail.
The SBA requires a 10% down by the buyer. right? Then if there is a seller note beyond the 10% down payment, depending on the cash flow of the business and the DSCR, basically the debt service capability of the cash flow, then the SBA lender might ask for a full 2-year standby, meaning that the seller will not receive a penny of that note within the first 2 years. The other aspect is for the buyers who may not have sufficient down payment for the full 10%, and then they ask the seller to participate for the balance of the 10. Unfortunately, I think the last rule that I remember from SBA, one of the recent one, is that under that scenario, now SBA will record a full 10-year standby, which then most sellers say, why would I want to do that? So it becomes an immediate deal killer. So we highly recommend to the buyers that go after the businesses that you can have the 10% down payment from a lending perspective. But all in all, and the other aspect, which is separate from the down payment, SBA lenders have also tightened the scrutiny against businesses that require license to operate. You could buy that business. It has become extremely difficult. So if it's like a HVAC or plumbing company, unless you do have HVAC and plumbing company or maybe construction related experience, they will not lend. It is extremely challenging to get loan for businesses where the buyer does not have direct experience in the industry of the business the buyer wants to acquire.
The closing and how involved are you in the handover, right? In terms of, hey, the deal's been done. What do you see kind of if you're involved? What makes them successful, not successful once they're, once everyone's signed?
So in our practice, we are always hands-on during the transaction in finding, like, let's say we represent a buyer, we're 100% available and hands-on in finding the right business, in making sure the deal is the right deal for the buyer, in making an offer, in going through the due diligence, working through the escrow, working through the SBA process, right? So we're always hands-on. This Aaron is acquiring this business and is going to merge it with his own business, right? That merging is a critical part, and it should not be a surprise. That work should be done during due diligence in terms of what is the actual cash flow that Aaron is going to benefit. And it takes a competent business broker to work with the individual, with Aaron, to say, well, maybe these functions you don't need to carry forward to your business, but these other functions you do. And that's a saving to the bottom line. Perhaps you don't need to have that facility. You could bring everything to your facility. That's a major increase in the bottom line because of the reduced lease. So there are multiple factors that we need to look at in depending on the objective for the transaction. However, at the end of the day, right? So, and all of that work needs to be done based on the financial quality of the selling business, the transferability of the business, the deal structure, the financing, the SBA financing, and the diligence that is done during that phase that will then result into a successful integration post closing.
And I guess, how much time, right? How much time does someone need to allow to get this done? So you identify your business. Are we talking, this is a year-long process? Am I being taken off the tools? From what I understand, you guys are carrying quite a bit of the load, but kind of how long's a piece of string, to get something like this done?
So let me break it into two different phases. Let's say from the time that we find a business and we're ready to make an offer, typically that should take somewhere around 90 days, maybe push it to 120 days if the deal size is larger, like multi-million dollars, right? And the longest pole is the SBA lender, right? It's usually 60 to 75 days. Before it, then it could take anywhere between maybe 2 to 4, 5 months to find the right business. We've had buyers whom were presented and literally we closed the deal within 3.5 to 4 months, starting from let's figure out what is it that you want.
And in the market right now, just to kind of close this out, are you seeing any sectors that are being more traded than others? Is there, more excitement around some kind of, subsector or types of businesses on Main Street that, either private equity or, young guys like Aaron are getting super excited about?
The other aspect that may be specific to Aaron, my direct recommendation, again, is to be very strategic about why you want to expand your business. Are you expanding to improve your bottom line? Are you expanding geographically to have more of a market share? Are you expanding to cross industries, maybe go from residential to commercial or commercial to residential? That is really important for one to be very honest and upfront to determine that. And then everything will flow easily from that decision.
No, that's amazing. Thank you so much